What drives a celebrated war hero to become one of history's most depraved killers? The question has haunted historians for centuries, and nowhere does it find a darker answer than in the life of Gilles de Rais. Born into privilege, praised as a warrior, and immortalized as a companion of Joan of Arc, his life began as the tale of a nobleman destined for greatness. Yet by the time of his execution in October 1440, his very name had become synonymous with evil. His transformation is not merely a story of personal downfall, but a grim reminder of how unchecked power can corrupt, how wealth can shield the guilty, and how even a man once considered a savior of France could descend into depths so unspeakable that medieval chroniclers struggled to put them into words. To understand Gilles de Rais, we must first travel back to the turbulent world of 15th century France, a kingdom torn apart by war, famine, and shifting loyalties, where glory on the battlefield could elevate a man to legend, and where the shadows of superstition offered a breeding ground for monstrous deeds. Chapter 1. A child of privilege. Gilles de Montmorency, better known to history as Gilles de Rais, was born around 1404 in the region of Brittany. His birth was not into obscurity, but into the upper echelons of French nobility. The Montmorency family was ancient, wealthy, and well-connected. By the time Gilles reached adolescence, fate had already dealt him a hand that placed him among the richest young men in France. Through inheritance, he acquired vast estates across Brittany, Anjou, and Poitou. These lands brought with them not only material wealth, but also political power. By his early 20s, Gilles was master of fortunes equivalent to millions in modern currency. His castles rose proudly above the countryside, symbols of his status, while peasants, tenants, and soldiers lived under his command. From the outside, his future seemed certain. A nobleman of means, trained in the arts of war, and destined to serve his king. Those who knew him in his youth described a boy of intelligence and charisma, though also headstrong, proud, and prone to excess. These traits, barely noticeable in his early years, would later harden into the flaws that led to his ruin. Chapter 2. Glory in the 100 Years. War. The France of Gilles's youth was not at peace. The 100 Years' War with England raged across the land. Towns were burned, fields ravaged, and royal authority was fragile. For a young noble, the battlefield was both a proving ground and an opportunity. Gilles embraced war with vigor. Accounts describe him as tall, powerfully built, and imposing in armor. He commanded respect, not only because of his noble birth, but because of his skill with the sword and his boldness in combat. His moment of greatest glory came in the 1420s, when he joined the campaigns of a young peasant girl from Domremy, Joan of Arc. Joan's arrival on the scene electrified France. Claiming divine guidance, she inspired armies and rallied a demoralized kingdom. Gilles de Rais became one of her most trusted lieutenants. At the siege of Orleans in Isère-Argeau, he fought at her side, helping to lift a siege that had seemed impossible to break. Chroniclers note that his banner flew beside hers, and that he distinguished himself in the chaos of battle. His courage and loyalty did not go unnoticed. For his service, King Charles VII rewarded him with the title of Marshal of France, one of the kingdom's highest military honors. To be a marshal was to stand at the very pinnacle of knightly achievement. In those years, Gilles's name was spoken with admiration. He was the image of the chivalric ideal, noble, brave, and victorious. Chapter 3. The cracks appear yet, even amid glory, troubling signs began to emerge. Those who looked closer saw in Gilles not only a warrior, but also a man consumed by extravagance. His spending was legendary. He constructed private chapels, staffed with choirs of hundreds, sponsored lavish theatrical productions, and entertained guests with feasts that rivaled royal banquets. He dressed in silks and furs, surrounding himself with symbols of luxury. Some dismissed it as the harmless vanity of a wealthy nobleman, but others saw danger in his obsession with spectacle and wealth. Where Joan of Arc embodied purity and humility, Gilles reveled in grandeur and excess. The seeds of corruption had already been planted, though few could imagine how they would grow. The decisive turning point came in 1431, with the capture and execution of Joan of Arc. For Gilles, it was a devastating blow. The girl with whom he had shared battlefield glory was burned as a heretic by the English. Her death stripped him not only of a comrade, but also of the cause that had given his life meaning. Deprived of the battlefield and alienated from the court, Gilles retreated into his estates, and it was there, away from the scrutiny of Paris and the discipline of war, that his descent began. Chapter 4. A nobleman without restraint in his lands in Brittany. Gilles de Rais was a law unto himself. His wealth was colossal, his authority nearly absolute. Few dared to question his actions, for to do so was to challenge one of France's most honored war heroes. He devoted himself to pursuits that revealed both his brilliance and his instability. Alchemy fascinated him. He poured fortunes into laboratories and experiments, seeking the philosopher's stone that could turn base metals into gold. His castles echoed, not with the clamor of soldiers but with the mutterings of alchemists, astrologers, and supposed magicians. Among the most notorious of these was the Italian cleric Francesco Prelati, who claimed knowledge of demonic conjurations. Under Prelati's influence, Gilles turned his attention not only to wealth, but to the occult. He came to believe that through rituals, sacrifices, and the invocation of infernal powers, he might secure riches and knowledge beyond mortal reach. It was here, in the twilight world of superstition and ambition, that his desires took their darkest turn. Chapter 5. The horrors begin at first. Whispers suggested that Gilles' occult rituals involved animals, but soon the accusations darkened. Witnesses would later testify that children began to disappear in the villages surrounding his estates. The method was cunning. Gilles employed servants and accomplices who promised poor families opportunities for their children, work in the nobleman's household, a chance at education, or simple access to food and shelter. For desperate parents, these offers seemed like salvation, but once inside the walls of Machecal or Tifages, the children never returned. Behind stone walls, meant to repel foreign enemies, unspeakable atrocities unfolded. Trial records and witness accounts preserved in court. Documents describe scenes of ritualized torture and murder. Children, some as young as 6, were stripped, humiliated, and subjected to sexual violence and physical torment. Gilles himself often presided over the killings, deriving pleasure from their suffering and treating death as both entertainment and ritual. The bodies were burned in castle furnaces, their ashes scattered in secret. The scale was staggering. Historians estimate anywhere from 80 to over 200 victims. What makes the crimes even more chilling is not merely the violence, but the theatricality. Witnesses claimed Gilles would kiss his victims tenderly before killing them, mocking innocence even as he destroyed it. He staged their deaths as spectacles, twisting the same love of performance that had once animated his plays into the most grotesque theater imaginable. Chapter 6. Companions in darkness. Gilles did not act alone. A network of accomplices enabled his crimes. Foremost among them were Henriette Griart and Etienne, nicknamed Poitvin, his close servants, who helped procure victims, assisted in tortures, and disposed of bodies. Their loyalty was rewarded with wealth, though it was also bound by fear and complicity. His cousin Gilles de Sille, another nobleman, lent his support, suggesting that corruption extended beyond Gilles alone. The magician Prelati supplied occult justification, persuading Gilles that demonic spirits demanded the blood of children. Even ordinary castle servants, though perhaps unwilling, became part of the silence. They cleaned chambers, burned bodies, and held their tongues, whether motivated by fear, loyalty, or greed. Their silence ensured that the atrocities continued unchecked for nearly a decade. Chapter 7. Rumors and Whispers. By the late 1430s, the whispers had become too numerous to ignore. In villages near his estates, families whispered about children who vanished after being lured to the barons' castles. Mothers warned their children to avoid the roads near Priests heard confessions tinged with fear. Yet Gilles remained untouchable. His noble rank and past service as marshal shielded him. Who would accuse a hero of France of such abominations? To speak openly was to risk ruin, but fate was turning against him. His lavish spending had drained his fortune. Lands were sold off, and debts mounted. His relatives, alarmed at the dissipation of the family wealth, began to petition the church for intervention, and then, in 1440, Gilles made the fatal mistake that would bring the full weight of justice crashing down upon him. Cliffhanger: the kidnapping of a cleric in a dispute over property. Gilles kidnapped a cleric named Jean Leferin and held him captive in his castle at This was no missing peasant child. No rumor whispered among villagers. This was an attack on the church itself, crime impossible to ignore. The Bishop of Nantes launched an investigation. At first, it focused only on the abduction, but as inquiries deepened, testimonies began to emerge. Servants spoke of disappearances. Parents described lost children. The whispers that had lingered for years now coalesced into accusations too. By 1440, Gilles de Rais had already left an indelible mark on France. To some, he remained the heroic marshal who had fought beside Joan of Arc. But to others, whispers of missing children and strange occult rituals had grown too persistent to ignore. The kidnapping of the cleric Jean Leferin gave the church the excuse it needed to act. What began as a dispute over property would soon unravel into one of the most shocking criminal investigations in medieval history. The trial that followed exposed not only the unimaginable crimes of Gilles de Rais, but also the fragility of a society where wealth and power could conceal monstrous evil for years. Chapter 1. The investigation begins when the Bishop of Nantes received word of the abduction of a cleric by Gilles de Rais. He moved swiftly. The church had long tolerated rumors of the baron's extravagance and eccentricities, but the violent seizure of a man of the cloth was intolerable. Church officials opened an inquiry, ostensibly to address the kidnapping, but as investigators questioned villagers, servants, and clerics, disturbing accounts began to surface. Mothers spoke of children who vanished after being promised employment in Gilles's castles. Servants whispered about strange rituals in hidden chambers. The bishop quickly realized that the scope of the case extended far beyond a single abduction. This was not merely a nobleman overstepping his bounds. It was a descent into evil unlike anything France had witnessed before. Chapter 2. The walls of silence crumble. For years, Gilles's crimes had been protected by silence. His accomplices obeyed him, his servants feared him, and the peasants dared not accuse him openly. But now, under the authority of the church, witnesses began to speak. A peasant testified that his young son had been taken by men in Gilles's service and never returned. Another claimed to have seen children entering the gates of Macheco, never to be seen again. Servants described late-night fires in castle furnaces, accompanied by the stench of burning flesh. Most damning of all were the confessions of Gilles's closest accomplices, Henriette Griart and Etienne Poitvin. Faced with the threat of torture and eternal damnation, they revealed the horrors they had witnessed: the abductions, the tortures, the grotesque murders. Their testimony painted a portrait of a man who had abandoned all humanity, consumed by lust, superstition, and sadism. Chapter 3. The trial opens in September 1440. The trial of Gilles de Rais began in the city of Nantes. It was presided over by both ecclesiastical and secular authorities, for his crimes encompassed heresy as well as murder. The courtroom was crowded. Nobles, clergy, merchants, and peasants all came to witness the proceedings. The case had become more than a legal matter, it was a public reckoning, a confrontation with the darkness that had haunted the region for a decade. At first, Gilles adopted a stance of defiance. He denied the charges, ridiculed the authority of the court, and claimed that as a Marshal of France, he could only be judged by the king. But the weight of testimony mounted day after day. Parents wept as they told of their missing children. Servants described in chilling detail the tortures they had witnessed. Accomplices confirmed every horror. The evidence was overwhelming, and Gilles's arrogance began to crumble. Chapter 4: Confession of a Monster. By October, under the combined pressure of damning testimony and the looming threat of torture, Gilles de Rais confessed. His words shocked even the hardened officials of the court. He admitted, not only to the murders but to the depravity that accompanied them. He described luring children with promises of food or work, only to imprison them in secret chambers. He confessed to taking pleasure in their sufferings, sometimes comforting them with gentle words before killing them. As if mocking their innocence, he admitted to decapitations and acts of unspeakable sexual violence. He explained how their bodies were burned in castle furnaces, their ashes scattered to hide the evidence, and he admitted that all of it had been intertwined with his obsession with the occult, that he believed the blood of children might grant him power through demonic pacts. The number of victims he confessed to was staggering. He claimed to have killed more than 140 children, though he admitted he had lost count. Historians believe the true number could have been even higher. The court was stunned. The crimes were so monstrous that some questioned whether a single man could be capable of them. But the testimonies aligned too perfectly. The details were too consistent. There could be no doubt. Chapter 5: The Psychology of Evil. As the court prepared to deliver judgment, observers struggled to comprehend what they had heard. How could a man who had once stood beside Joan of Arc, figure of purity and faith, have fallen so far? Modern historians and psychologists see in Gilles de Rais many of the traits associated with serial killers. Sadism, deriving pleasure from the suffering of others. Escalation, beginning with fascination and cruelty, progressing to murder. Targeting of the vulnerable children chosen because they were easy to lure and defenseless. Ritualistic, elements combining sexuality with occult beliefs to justify his actions. In many ways, Gilles de Rais stands as one of the earliest recorded serial killers in European history. His wealth and nobility shielded him for years, allowing his crimes to continue long after any ordinary man would have been caught. Chapter 6: The Verdict. On October 25, 1440, the court delivered its verdict. Gilles de Rais was found guilty on charges of murder, sodomy, heresy, and invoking demons. The sentence was death, but the court determined that simple execution was not enough. His crimes demanded a punishment that would match their enormity, both in severity and in symbolism. He was to be hanged until dead, and then his body burned to ash. This dual punishment carried deep meaning. Hanging was the fate of criminals. Burning was the fate of heretics. To burn his body was to deny him even the dignity of burial, ensuring that no relics or remains could ever be venerated. The sentence was designed not only to destroy him but also to purify society of his corruption. Chapter 7: The Final Hours. The night before his execution, Gilles de Rais reportedly spent his time in prayer. Priests recorded that he wept for his sins, confessed fully, and begged forgiveness from God. Whether this repentance was sincere or simply the performance of a man facing death remains uncertain. On the morning of October 26, 1440, thousands gathered outside Nantes to witness the execution. Estimates suggest as many as 10,000 people crowded into the fields, a mix of nobles, clergy, merchants, peasants, and grieving families. The condemned man was brought in a wooden cart, stripped of all the finery that had once marked his nobility. He was dressed in plain clothes, humbled before the crowd. Many who saw him that morning remembered the contrast, The once proud marshal who had ridden into battle beside Joan of Arc, now reduced to a broken figure awaiting death. Chapter 8. Execution and Fire. The scaffold was prepared with grim care. A gallows stood high above the crowd, and beneath it, a pyre of wood and straw awaited. Before his death, Gilles was allowed to speak. Contemporary accounts record that he addressed the crowd with unusual calm. He asked forgiveness from God and from the families of his victims. He warned the nobles present not to fall into the sins of pride and excess that had destroyed him. His words, whether genuine or theatrical, moved some to tears. Then came the final act. The noose was placed around his neck. At the signal, the trap was sprung, and Gilles de Rais fell. After several minutes, his body hung limp. The Marshal of France, the war hero of Orleans, was dead, but the spectacle was not complete. His body was lowered onto the pyre. The flames were lit, and the crowd watched in silence as fire consumed him. The same fire that had taken Joan of Arc now burned her former comrade, though for very different reasons. Hours later, when only ashes remained, they were scattered, leaving nothing behind. No gravi, no relic, no more. Only memory and horror. Chapter 9. Shockwaves across Europe. The execution of Gilles de Rais sent shockwaves throughout France and beyond. His fall was unprecedented. A Marshal of France, executed not for treason or political intrigue, but for the systematic murder of children. Chroniclers struggled to make sense of it. Some saw it as proof of the dangers of wealth and power without restraint. Others as a warning about the influence of the occult. Still others viewed it as divine justice, cleansing France of a great evil. For the families of his victims, the execution brought some measure of closure, though no punishment could restore what had been lost. For the broader society, it was a collective exorcism, a public ritual to banish the terror that had haunted their lands. Chapter 10. Legacy of a monster. In the centuries that followed, the story of Gilles de Rais took on a life of its own. Ballads, chronicles, and legends retold his crimes, sometimes exaggerating them, sometimes sanitizing them. His name became a symbol of corruption and depravity, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind noble titles and glorious reputations. Some even linked him with folklore. The tale of Bluebeard, the wealthy nobleman who murdered his wives in secret chambers, is believed by many to be inspired by Gilles de Rais, though the details differ. The essence of a respected man hiding monstrous crimes in his castle aligns closely with his story. Modern criminologists study him as an early example of serial killing. Centuries before the term existed, his case demonstrates how sadism, power, and superstition can combine to create horrors beyond imagination, and historians continue to debate the meaning of his downfall. Was he a victim of circumstance, driven mad by the loss of Joan of Arc and the emptiness of peacetime? Or was the darkness always within him, waiting for wealth and power to unleash it? Epilogue, Hero and Monster. The life of Gilles de Rais is a story of contrasts. He was both hero and monster, savior and destroyer. He fought to free his country from foreign invaders, and then he terrorized his own people. He stood beside Joan of Arc, a symbol of faith and purity, only to abandon all decency in pursuit of wealth, pleasure, and forbidden power. His execution was not merely the end of one man, but a warning to generations. That power without morality leads to corruption, that wealth without restraint leads to ruin, and that even the greatest of heroes can fall into the darkest abyss. The flames that consumed his body in 1440 have long since burned out, but the lessons of his life remain. They remind us that evil often wears the mask of respectability, and that vigilance is always required to guard against the corruption of power.